Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and our guest this week, Lake Sakakawea guide and tournament fisherman, Matt Liebel. Matt is one of those guys in the summer months spending almost every day on the big Missouri River Reservoir. I spend most of this conversation asking Matt about one of the most popular big fish techniques, trolling crankbaits. Where you're from in your home body of water.
So I live in Williston, North Dakota, and I grew up in western North Dakota. I grew up in Watford City, so I've fished Lake Sakakawea my whole life, especially the western half of it, or western three-quarters or so. I haven't done a whole lot of fishing on the east end comparatively, but I have set foot over there quite a few times. But western end of Sakakawea is kind of my home body of water, and it's a pretty amazing place. So.
Yeah, and you've carved out a career for yourself. You realize a guide career. Talk to me about how long have you been guiding for, and you also do a little bit of tournament fishing. The local tournaments. Your name is always popping up. But you've traveled for some tournaments. How does that kind of fit into your career?
I'm a teacher at the middle school here in Williston. So then my summer job basically is guiding and fishing. I started guiding about 9 years ago now. I believe it's my 9th summer. And I actually decided to start guiding after we won a fishing tournament. We won the Governor's Cup in 2011. Decided to use some of those winnings to put into the guide service and get all that started, website and all that kind of stuff going. So that's kind of where it all started. And I'd always kind of wanted to be a guide growing up. I would be on the boat all the time. And as long as I was allowed, I would be on the boat. So I never asked to go in early. So it's kind of always been a passion, and continue to do it, and figured with my teaching, I thought that would work out pretty well. I taught a few years and then worked just other summer jobs, and I'm like, yeah, these summer jobs aren't that great, so let's get one that I really enjoy. So then I started guiding, and now I just use basically tournament fishing as my vacation in the guiding world.
Where do you put Sakakawea right now in terms of, you've been guiding for 9 years, you've been fishing for a lot more years than that. Where does Lake Sakakawea stack up for you right now in comparison to itself over your whole career?
This year's been one of the tougher years on Sakakawea because we got spoiled the last few years. It was so unbelievable the last few years, and now those bigger fish, they're bigger fish, and there's becomes less of them because some die and some get taken out. And so they're still there. There's still lots of them there, but we've been overtaken by the younger year class that's coming up, and it's just a huge year class of 10 to 14 inch fish, and it's unbelievable how many there are, because you can catch them one after the other. So it's kind of like it's in a little bit of a transition almost, where you're used to catching these bigger fish, and now those bigger fish I think a lot of them went and chased the smelt population that's out in the middle of the lake or out deeper and not targeted by most anglers, and it's a lot more difficult fishing. Right now, I mean, it's a pretty impressive fishery, but this year and even late last summer, it wasn't catching every day. It was definitely fishing. You had to work for them. It kept every single one of us guides out here on our toes. For sure, it wasn't like in the past. It had been pretty easy for us. We could go out and pretty much count on fish every day, and now this last couple of years we've had to work for it. So it's a good challenge, though. You're learning. That's something I'm doing when I'm guiding. I get to fish a little bit, depending on the group that I have with that day, I'll get to fish a little bit. Generally, I'm throwing something completely different to try new things and learn ways to put more fish in the boat and try some new techniques while there others are, using the proven techniques.
What a great strategy, knowing that you fish a few tournaments here and there, and you're always on the water, but you're always trying to learn. And that mentality, that's really what I wanted to tap into. And I wanted to narrow it down, because we could talk about fishing on Lake Sakakawea for hours and hours. But to narrow it down, I really wanted to talk to you about, there's a lot of trolling crankbaits on Sakakawea. What is it about Sakakawea that makes trolling crankbaits a great method?
The first thing with Sakakawea and crankbaits is just its sheer size, and they're reservoir fish. So reservoir fish are known for here today, gone tomorrow, and especially the last few years they've proven that's the case. So you can cover so much more water, and in the summer This time of year now, where the water temperatures are up above 65 and warmer, I'm going 2.5 miles an hour as my starting point trolling crankbaits. A lot of people, other places start at 2. I'm at 2.5, and if I'm catching fish, and I'm kicking it up to go faster and faster to try and cover more water and figure out where that bigger school of fish is, or the bigger class of fish is, and try and cover many places or as many points as possible. Figure that out. So
when you're talking about the spots, what are you looking for in a good spot on Lake Sakakawea and with trolling, and then breaking down how you're going to troll it?
Yeah, there's so many different spots, types of spots that you control. You control the flats, which are probably your easiest thing to troll when you get out on the flats. They're easy. There's not a lot of big depth changes where boat control is super important. And those fish, they're typically just spread out on those flats, so you can cover those, and then you have more of a steep rock type structure, rock bluffs, and along those you're going to be trolling more off different depths, and you kind of set your crankbaits at different depths. You set your shallow, or your ones closer to the bank a little shallower, your deep ones out away from the bank a little bit deeper as you're trolling along these steep breaks, because a lot of times you'll see these fish when you drive around and mark fish. You'll see some up in 16. As you go, they won't always be in the same depth, and they're just working up and down these break lines. And I think they're just trapping bait up along the break line there, and that's where they're going to sit. So you troll along those and stagger your depths a little bit to figure those out. There's shallow trolling in the weeds. When you have weeds in the middle of the summer, there's still shallow trolling bites going on in the weeds. This year our water levels are a little bit low. I shouldn't say low, that's kind of a wrong term. Are lower than they've been in the past. We still have good water levels, but the last few years we've been in flood stage, so they feel like they're low to us when it's 8 or 9 feet lower than it had been. So there's not as much flooded vegetation and weed growth this year, so we're not seeing as much of a bite in that shallow weeds on the west end as we have in the past. But a lot of times you control shallow weed lines in the backs of bays. Water temperatures can be 80 plus degrees, and people think that walleyes aren't going to be in there, but that's often not the case. There's plenty of walleyes in there, and I think especially with the whole industry, you're seeing a lot of changes on the way a walleye is perceived as a more of a predatory fish, and how aggressive you can fish for these things. And they're almost largemouth bass style out in the weeds and stuff, where you think you're not, you've never thought of it as a walleye spot before.
What would you say percentage-wise is it mostly flats trolling out on Sakakawea? Maybe let's get into that. What's the most popular thing out there? And then let's kind of break it down for everybody and maybe kind of go through a generic progression of selecting baits and maybe even down to your gear. What kind of line do you like, and how far do you spread out your planer boards?
When trolling the flats, the first and foremost thing I'm looking for is, obviously you're going to figure out the depth that the fish are in. So you're going to drive around, use your electronics, and mark those fish and see what depths they're hanging out in. They're 10 to 12 feet or something like that. Earlier in the year, generally a little shallower, and then as you move out, they move out a little bit deeper. But again, don't sell yourself on one depth because it's mid-July. I don't think they have to be in 20 to 25 feet. Don't be afraid to look shallow, especially when the wind's blowing. Get up there, and some of my best days trolling have been where I just drive the boat and keep it off the bank, and just try and keep it off the bank and let the clients reel in fish, or let whoever's with me reel in fish, because if I let go of the controls for too long, well, we're going to be up on the shore. So sometimes that 3 to 4 foot trolling bite can be really good if the wind's blowing in. But I'm looking at, and when I first start out trolling, once I find those fish, see what kind of depths they're starting. When I first pull up there, I figure out that depth, and then I'm going to pull out my crankbaits accordingly. For the most part, I run the same 4 rods, trolling crankbaits all year long. I run 2 12-foot rods with fire line on them, and then I run 2 5-foot rods, 2 shorties with lead core on them. And I run those 2 shorties out the back, and then the 2 fire lines out the side. And that 12 and 5-foot rods, those spread the lines out so we don't have very many tangles. And I use those a lot. People often wonder why I use lead core even in 4 feet of water. And part of the reason is that one, I don't have to have as many rods in my boat. And if somebody's trying to get started in trolling, and a lot of people are scared of lead core, and it's really not that scary. It's just a different type of line. That's all there is to it. You put a leader on it. If I was suggesting for somebody to get started trolling, I would just go with 2 Fireline and 2 lead core. I had run 12-foot rods and 5-foot rods with Fireline before, and what I found out was I'd end up with more tangles like that, because when you turn the boat, that lead core follows the boat so much tighter. And when you start turning, and with that Fireline, that swings a lot more out to the sides, and you end up getting more tangles. And so that's why I went with the lead core, and I just stuck with that the last, 4 or 5 years. I haven't had Fireline shorties in the boat. It's always just been my lead core shorties. So that's what I do most of the time. Planer boards are definitely an option that you could use as well, and I have used those at times when I get creative and decide to troll 6 rods with enough people in the boat, but that gets to be a little bit more work, so I don't do that as much.
And talk a little bit about bait selection. You're identifying the depth, and that's one thing. But on Sakakawea, what all are you considering when you're talking about bait selection? And maybe even make a comparison, if you could, against a different body of water. I mean, are you matching the hatch with your colors or your profile? How diverse do you get with your baits, and how quickly do you rifle through baits and colors when you're trying to figure out that that bite on any given day?
So when I'm choosing baits, I start with a selection. I start with 4 different baits. I never start with 2 of the same thing. Usually try and get all 4 different styles: a jointed style, a shad style, a minnow style, and then maybe like a hornet, a Salmo hornet type style, which I don't think of as a shad bait. It's just its own category. I don't know what you really want to classify it as, but those are generally kind of the 4 I start with, and then slowly, over time, I start with those 4 styles, and then I also go with 4 different colors on those. Color, generally, I don't see color making a big difference overall, but there are definitely days where color does matter. But a lot of days it's not a real big deal. But I do kind of look at, if it's cleaner water, especially, I go to more of those natural colors, or like the blues and purples, whites, those types of things with more of the natural chrome looks, and especially on brighter days, I look for those. But then the fire tiger color is just such a good color everywhere you go, that no matter where I go, I'm at least putting on a fire tiger to start. So that's going to be on there. Fire tiger, that Salmo hot perch color, those types of things. What I look at a lot. If the water's a little bit dirtier, which we run into a lot on the west end here, up especially north of the Newtown Bridge, when the river runoff's coming in like it is now, I'll go to more brighter colors. And then sometimes when it gets dirty too, they like darker colors, like a dark red or even a black color. Sometimes I don't know if they seem to be able to pick that out, that darker color in the dirtier water. It seems kind of weird, but I've had a lot of luck with darker colors, some of the reds and dark oranges and that type of thing that they have out too that I'll see. But again, I kind of run, like your schmelt imitating colors, and then fire tiger, and then a few pinks, purples, blues. I think a lot of crankbait colors catches fishermen more than it does fish. Don't get me wrong, they've caught me enough times. I have all sorts of color selections in the boat, but I always end up going to the same 6 or 7 colors that you have. And you talk about switching baits, if you're going through, if one bait's catching them and the others aren't, then it's time to start switching. So, and it depends on how big of a stretch. There's some flats you control for miles, so you can go miles in one direction and not have to turn around. Go a half hour and that bait hasn't caught anything, and it's time to change it. And say probably a half hour at the most is what I would go for a crankbait. Unless it has, and sometimes you get stuck in history, unless it has some history or something, that's a bait that doesn't produce a lot of fish, but when it does, it produces a big one or something like that. But I'm changing size, and I generally start with like a number 7 or number 5 crankbaits on my lead core rods. And the nice thing about running those lead core rods is you can run small baits at any depth, and you can run big baits too on those lead core rods. You don't have to run just small rods. I think sometimes in the fishing industry a little bit we get more on trying to sell more gear to some of these anglers, and especially with some of the anglers coming in on limited budgets, and they're thinking, well, I need this for that and this for that, and I need all these different things, when we can try and keep it as simple as possible, and don't get stuck where the one rod has to only be used for one thing. I think that can be sometimes a negative thing in the fishing industry. So.
Yeah, you're right. That definitely hits home with a lot of people. If they have a particular budget, and you look like on a year like this where this COVID-19, the license sales, fishing license sales across the country are way up. It just, a lot of these extracurricular programs are shut down for everybody. And so spending quality time with the family out in the boat is now one of the most popular things out there. A lot of people are getting into the industry, or maybe they're getting into the industry more than they were before. You talk to a boat salesman and, they're selling a lot of boats. Maybe describe that a little bit. When you have your clients in the boat and they're asking you these types of questions, where is the money spent the best, in terms of, building up your crankbait arsenal?
First thing, crankbait arsenal would be having line counters. Good line counters, that would be the first and foremost thing. You can catch them on a lot of different sticks. The rod, it's important, and when you start especially fighting big fish and things like that, there's times where that rod's you're gonna catch more and put more fish in the boat with one type of rod, but you can find some trolling rods for pretty low priced. I would spend more money on a reel and getting those line counters, so then you can reproduce that line out. That's just the biggest thing. People are trolling crankbaits and have no idea where they are in the water column. That's pretty tough. It's I just remember back before I had line counters and my dad had line counters growing up, and we'd just throw them out there for a while, and some days we'd catch them and some days we wouldn't. And I can remember when he bought those line counters, and we were trolling on the west end here, and between Bear Den and Skunk Bay, and it was unbelievable the day we had, like, as we figured out how we could reproduce those things, and just the trolling bite that we had, it was just insane. And it was, warning, it can be very addictive when you start getting into the crankbait trolling, that's for sure. When you figure it out, a lot of people think it's a boring technique, because you can set the rod in the rod holder and the rod will set the hook and you just reel them in. Well, when you start really tweaking it and figuring out how to make those fish bite, better and consistently and bigger, that's where it gets to be a lot of fun. And when you figure it out and you can just put so many fish in the boat with it, it's quite a blast and can be very addictive. So reels, like I said, good line counter reel would be the most important thing. And then second behind that would probably be my electronic GPS on there, with speed, because speed control can be pretty important. Some days you got to really watch that speed, and other days it doesn't matter. You catch them at 1.5 to 3.5 miles an hour. So I would say the GPS speed, and then also just your graph, because you could troll for miles and miles too and not see many fish. But part of that trolling is too, you can, when you're marking these fish, and all of a sudden in this one stretch you're marking a lot more. Well, you can make a mark on your note on your graph, then realize that, okay, I'm done with this trolling stretch, but here was the best area, and you can start nailing it down after, you troll this whole flat. And this 200-yard stretch is the best area that's holding the best fish, and now you can really concentrate your time and put a lot of fish in the boat.
I love it. That's great information. Now, I want to kind of go back. We were referencing a lot to flats trolling. I want to go back to the spots. So, as you progress through the summer and even into fall, into that early fall time frame, what is your progression chasing those fish? Where do those spots change? How do you decide now, if you're not getting the production out of the flats, or maybe it's real crowded, there's a lot of live bait rigging, it makes it hard to troll your cranks at 3 miles an hour, going and your progression to looking at new spots, trying to find that deep rock structure, and then maybe some nuance to trolling that deeper rock structure?
So as the year goes on, those fish, generally you hear that, as the water gets warmer, the fish start to move deeper, and that's a pretty good case. Like you said, there's always some outliers to that, but when you start going a little bit deeper and you kind of follow the bait fish, that's a big thing. There's so much smelt in Lake Sakakawea right now that it's all over the place, and those walleyes just follow that bait fish. So really, you got to, using your graph, and you can mark your bait fish cruising at 30 to 40 miles an hour down the lake. You can mark them, these huge schools of bait, so it's not hard to figure out, where they are. You can just, as long as your transducer's set to read through the water and you're going, you should be able to pick up those schools of bait fish. So I look for those. They generally kind of follow the old river channel, and that's where most of these steep bluffs happen too, is near where the old river channel swung in there, and they cut that bank out over time. But so those steep banks, and they're pretty easy to see. You can see them from a long ways away. They're huge, giant bluffs. Again, late summer, there's a lot of good trolling along those, and with that bait out, it drops off quickly to 60, 70 feet of water out off the side there. That bait goes and hangs out there. You don't have to be real concerned about always being right on the bottom with that, or close to the bottom, because I've had many times where I've went out around a boat that's live baiting or even cranking and just had to go around a boat, go out deeper, or come off a little point that you can't make. You can't make the sharp turn because you'll drag your crankbaits over top of it and snag up everything, or something like that, where you're just trolling out over the deep for a few minutes, and all of a sudden you got a 26-inch walleye that eats your bait, and you're like, huh, that's weird. And then you start to figure that out, and there's been many days where I've figured out that, oh, I don't even have to be anywhere near the rock structure. I can just go troll just out anywhere from, had been catching them in 14 to 20 feet, and I can just drive out around, don't have to worry about going around boats, because I'm going to catch fish when I go around boats, and sometimes I do better just trolling 14 to 20 feet down over 60 feet, because those fish, a lot of times I see that pressure just pushes the fish around, boat pressure, and they just slide out. They don't move up or down, they just stay in that same depth and slide out and just suspend and sit out over that deep water, but they'll just be down 14 feet or 20 feet.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. And that is so cool about Sakakawea and other bodies of water like it, that it's a big body of water, and there's so much more happening under the surface than we know. And there's so much pioneering and nuance that people are learning, whether it's on accident like that or just bringing a nuance from a different body of water and applying it to Lake Sakakawea. How is that for you? I mean, so here you are, you grew up and you work on a premier walleye fishery. Do you even care to go fish anywhere else, even if it is for a tournament?
Some days it's, you get out there, especially tournament fishing, and you're pre-fishing, and it's not going the best, and you're sitting here like, why did I come here for this? Why did I come here for this? I know I could be catching them good at home, back home. It is. I mean, it's always, you go to those other fisheries and you learn things all the time. We were at Mille Lacs earlier this year for that AIM event, and just some nuances there we learned just from fishing Mille Lacs with, rigging creek chubs and things like that to bring back to Sakakawea. Just some little things that you pick up. So, yes, it's hard to leave, but it's a lot of fun to go other places and learn, because you can bring those techniques back. I know I went out to Lake Erie quite a while ago fishing on the co-angler side, and I've brought some things, especially just managing planer boards and things like that for a suspended bite on Sakakawea. I haven't got to use it exactly as I would hoped at sometimes, because it just hasn't hasn't panned out like I want it to yet, but I'm going to figure it out one of these days. And I mean, the problem is these bait fish move so much out here, so the suspended bite is so finicky. They move so much, it's insane. I know, like I said, don't have a lot of experience on Erie and Green Bay and some of those. I know they drive around for hours trying to find those fish, and I think it's the same thing here. I just haven't had the patience to drive around for hours to try and find that suspended bite all the time.
Yeah, but it is fun and exciting to think about, though. Just being a fisherman, like yourself. I mean, we all still have that, that 14, 15-year-old kid inside of us that just loves to fish and figure stuff out. And, it's just fun to, to maintain that level of studious, just when you go somewhere, you're always learning. You're not going there to try to conquer it and say that you know everything. It's quite the opposite. When you go places, whether you finish high in a tournament and, cash a check for $1,000, well, really the biggest takeaway sometimes wasn't $1,000, but a couple things that you learned that you're gonna be able to benefit for the next 10 years guiding on your home body of water.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely, for sure. That learning curve is you can never stop learning. And as a teacher, that's, the thing I try to instill in all the students is never stop learning. And then you have to continue it on the lake as well, because there's plenty of spots, and the lake changes. Sakakawea, yeah, it's kind of, the spots are all still the same, but the fish aren't relating to those spots the same. So the lake is always changing. And if growing up, some of my favorite areas to fish, I hardly ever fish right these last few years. I've hardly fished them because every time I've pulled in there, I haven't caught anything. So it's like, okay, I don't know why. I haven't figured out exactly why, but things are changing. So you have to constantly be on that changing edge and cutting edge and adapting to things, because it doesn't stay the same all the time. There are some things we could probably go back on in his fishing history and could probably pull out again and do really well with, but there's other techniques that we've realized that these aren't near as productive as they used to be, and maybe we should just let those go.
So here's one for you. How often in your classroom does one of the kids, like little Johnny, raise his hand and ask on behalf of his parents, what fishing techniques they should be considering? I mean, are these kids trying to infringe on your career a little bit ever?
A little bit. Last year, this last school year, I had a brother of a student that I had a year or two before that. His brother comes in, he goes, "My brother told me if we try and get you to talk about fishing, we could pretty much waste the whole day and not have to do anything in class." Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's
Great.
Awesome.
So, I mean, and they definitely, we talk a little bit of fishing, but during the school year, I'm a little bit out of the loop at times too, do a lot of coaching and stuff, so I have a little tougher time, putting them right on fish all the time. But they definitely ask. And yeah, you said that. My dad said you caught their fish and caught fish here. Or, my dad fished against that tournament, and or the kid. Me and my dad fished that tournament. How'd you catch them all? Or, I've had the same thing. How did you guys catch them all? I couldn't catch fish that day. You definitely have your good days and your bad days. I mean, on tournament fishing, everybody does, and you hate to think about the bad days, but
oh yeah,
they certainly happen. So.
That is classic. That's funny. Well, talking about trolling, what a great 101 lesson here. How about, just to kind of round out the trolling, trolling isn't the only method, right? And especially from a guiding perspective, you got to be a chameleon, because you might only have one chance or one day to work with these clients and do the best job you can. How often are you working your trolling techniques in conjunction with other methods, and how does that kind of fit in for you as you go throughout the summer months?
It kind of really depends on what the clients are always right for the most part, right? The customer is always right.
Yep.
And so you have to kind of go with what they prefer to fish. And there are some people, like I mentioned, that crankbait trolling's not their thing, and they like to hold the rod in their hand. So, but a big part is education, and educating them on why we do these things, and how we're going to be successful and have a good. And success is always measured different for each person. So I try to ask, to start the trip each day, what are your goals? What are we trying to do today? Are we trying to catch a bunch of fish? Are we trying to catch big fish? We just want to take home a limited eaters. What are their goals for the day or the trip, or whatever they want. A lot of them just want to catch fish. So, and then I can say, well, here's our best, what we've had lately. Here's our best bets have been trolling. And sometimes you'll find them, some days where you got them on some of the big main lake points, which aren't especially easy to troll. Especially if you get some boat traffic on them, by the time you troll it, you're off the structure. So you got to, pull more live bait so you could stay on the structure and be in the zone a little bit more. So it's really easy, for clients, trolling and crankbaits is pretty easy. It's easy to coach them how to do it and how to get the rod set, and then the one difficult thing for people that haven't trolled crankbaits and they've done some fishing before is, especially with the lead core and the fire line that I'm trolling with, it's no stretch line. When you're trolling at 2.5 miles an hour on no stretch line, you certainly don't want to horse these fish to the boat. Well, we get clients from all different fishing backgrounds, and some of them, you can tell them the slow and steady reel, and some of them are used to the fishing salmon or something where they have to really horse on them and really try and fight them into the boat. Well, you watch a lot of hooks get pulled out at the same time. So you kind of have to, read your clients and what they want to do and see what their goals are and go from there. I've turned some people around on trolling too, where, they like, wow, I didn't know trolling was this, you put this much into it, or how you reproduced it this well. Whenever we've tried it, we haven't had that good of luck, or that type of thing. Or, wow, that's a lot of fun when you really get into them and the rods are going off nonstop. It's a blast to watch those people learn those things. And that's kind of the biggest thing, I think, is trying to teach people, how to put these fish in the boat. And, sometimes it takes a little bit of coaxing to get them to put the crankbaits on. But if I could troll crankbaits, if I had a choice, I'd probably be doing that most of the time. There's obviously some other fun bites, pitch bites, and I like fishing it all. As you said, you got to be adaptive and be ready to adjust at any time. If I could troll crankbaits, that would probably be my number one go-to.
So in a fantasy world, if you had the entirety of Lake Sakakawea to yourself for a day, and you could pick the day, and you could pick the weather, and you could pick anything and everything going on in the boat and everything, just a complete fantasy hypothetical, have you had one of those days? Like, do you have a memorable day where you're like, my goodness, when the wind was just perfect into all my favorite spots and there was no boats there?
I have one tournament story where I had a spot where I'd been catching some big fish, and I hadn't been getting very many of them. I could get 2 to 3 a day, maybe. It was actually in the Women on Water tournament out at White Earth, where it's 2 women in the boat fishing, and one guy can be the captain, and he can't touch a rod when it's in the water, but he can net fish, do all that stuff. Well, I had this big fish spot, and it had been good to me, but like I said, I could never put 5 fish together for the tournament. So you'd spend the whole tournament day there, and you could get 3. And it's like, you need 5 to win. I mean, 3 big ones is still not enough to win. And so, anyways, this spot had been, I'd just fish it for 5 to 7 hours a day and would get 3 fish. And I went through it again, and I could see them. You could see them on the graph. They were there. I told my wife that I was fishing this tournament with my wife and her friend Liz. I said, all right, they're there, and we've done well in this spot in the past too. And I said, well, what we're going to do is we'll go get a limit of some, nice size fish, or good, just a limit of fish, because you could have 10 in the boat. You weighed your top 6, so you had 4 to play with. So let's go get in the morning, because my morning bite had been better for the smaller fish where I could get some fish consistently. Let's go get some of those, and then we'll get a few of those, and then we'll go to the big fish spot and stay there the rest of the day. Well, we go and we're fishing around, and like the bite was, I just couldn't catch a fish. We couldn't get a fish trolling. We were trolling crankbaits all over. It comes like 12:30, and we don't have a fish in the boat yet, or a keeper walleye at least. And I mean, I'm talking keeper, like even a 16-incher we would have kept. I couldn't buy one, and I'm like, oh man, this isn't good. I said, well, it's about time to go to the big fish spot, and maybe we'll catch the big fish and win big fish prize or something like that. Still something we can win. And we pulled in there at 1 o'clock when we pulled into this spot, and it went unbelievably nuts. I'd never seen it do this before. And I still haven't seen it since then. I've only seen one day like it. And we went in there, and at 1 o'clock, at 1:05, we had our first fish, a 24-incher. And at 110, we had our second fish, another 23-incher. And then at about 115, we had another 22-incher. And it was like, holy cow, what's going on here? Like, they were just on the chow. And at 155, we had 6 fish in the boat. So in 55 minutes, we had our 6 fish limit in the boat. I'm like, okay. And the first few fish that went in the boat, I didn't even measure them. I was like, oh yeah, they're going in. They're going in. And now we had 6 of them, and I'm like, we better measure these fish. We still got a couple hours left of fishing time, and we don't even know what fish we have in the boat. So we took them out and measured them all to see exactly how big they were. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. It's a pretty good start. And in the next, I think at 3:30, we had 9 fish in the boat, so we had gotten 3 more upgrades. We'd gotten 7, 8, and 9, which were upgrades. And we had 9 in the boat. And another friend came by, and I said, yeah, we're looking for one. And I said, it's got to be bigger than 24 inches. So we had 6 of them, or 5 of them that were bigger than 24 inches, and go a few more minutes. I think we had to be in at 4:30. I think the tournament, we had to be back in at 4:30. And it's about 3:30. And another big thing with trolling is changing your speed up a little bit. That's a good little tip there. We got a fish on, and Liz, I can't remember who grabbed it, Liz or my wife, Amy, grabbed it and started reeling it in. And like, yeah, this is a pretty good one. Okay, and then look over and the other rod goes too, so we got a double. And we get net the one and set it on the floor of the boat. And I said, that looks like an upgrade. And then the other one comes in and net it and put it on the floor of the boat. I'm like, that looks like an upgrade too. We had 2 upgrades on the boat, and we had to let one go. So we had 9 fish in the live well, and we could keep one more for the tournament. We had 2 of them that were both bigger than 2 of our fish in the live well that we could have waited. So we had to decide which one was the small. We had to take the smaller of the upgrades and let it go. So we had more weight we had to let go. I'm like, this is unreal. And it was just for 2 hours, and they went nuts. And we went in and we had still an hour to spare, so we coasted back into the boat ramp, and we actually got back in. And another friend that knew about the area, that's big fish area too. As soon as we pulled in, he called and said, "Did you guys get him?" And I'm like, "Why is he calling me?" He's like, "Yeah, we went there to start the day, and we've been done since 11." They were already done. They had their 10 fish by 11 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my! And
they were done, and it ended up that we ended up having bigger weight. We had just over 29 pounds that day, and it was just in a matter of 2 hours. It was that time, that bite window that you hear about, or that day. It was just unbelievable, where you couldn't hardly keep them off. And I told the girls when we were coming in, I'm like, we should win. We should have enough to win. I would be really surprised if somebody beats us. And then it turned, then a friend calls and says, "Yeah, we got them good. We've been back here since 11." And I'm like, "Uh-oh."
Oh, dang.
So how good did you get them? But they had 26 and change. We had 29 and change. So we had them by a little ways, but it was, we were the top 2 teams by quite a bit. I think by 4 pounds or something was third place. I think 22 pounds was third place. So we had them pretty well. And it was one of those days, and I still don't know why they bit like that day, and we've never seen it since. And that was in 2017, I believe, is when we did that. And I've tried to reproduce that, and ever since even that year, I've caught some fish out of this spot, but it's changed. It hasn't held the big fish in numbers like it did, and I don't know why, but
yeah, it's just like like chasing the dragon. It's like, oh my gosh, you'll never forget that one time back in 2017. But it's like you'll lose all your hair just trying to figure out why or trying to recreate it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a spot that's definitely, it's a unique spot, and I've used Google Earth to try and really pinpoint this spot, and you can manipulate the pictures on Google Earth to look at when the water was really low on Sakakawea. You can kind of figure out some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to figure out some of these other spots like it, and I have never found any other spots like it. And last few years it hasn't been any good. So I don't know. Actually, I talked to the game and fish biologist on the lake, and he had talked about the lake just maturing over time. It matures and things change, and like just the way the bait fish are and the bait fish abundance and that kind of thing. They're actually seeing right now smelt that are a little bit smaller than they have been in the past. the bait fish are a little bit smaller. So, they're hoping for some more flooded vegetation for the next few years. But things are, that's the one thing. Things are always changing, and you just can't get locked into one specific area.
What's your perspective on bite windows? I mean, you look at it like if you hadn't experienced that particular bite in that particular spot previous to that or since then, have you seen other examples of bite windows that open up on Sakakawea, or do you find that generally speaking, you can catch these fish throughout the day? So, I guess that would be my question. What do you find in terms of bite windows on Sakakawea, and how does that affect your fishing?
Some places on Sakakawea, especially the big fish, they've had some bite windows for sure. And I have never been able to figure out exactly why they'll bite for an hour or two and why they'll go. But, some spots, especially the Van Hook Arm, you think of some of those tournaments, the Van Hook Classic that they run up there. When I fish that one, it'll be, you'll get them for an hour and you'll go to your weigh boat to measure those fish, and you'll come back and they'll be done. And they'll be back in the exact same spot. Doesn't even have to be other boats there. You could have it to yourself, and they're done. There was 10 marks there before that you'd come over and you'd mark these big fish, and now they're gone. And where did they go? It's always been a thing that you're trying to figure out. For your standard eater fish, generally, I have seen not a lot of big bite windows. But this year especially, seems like when you get on the decent fish, even like 16 to 20 inch, just good eater fish that Sakakawea has been known for, it seems like they're in there for a little bit, and then you'll get them, and then all of a sudden those little ones come in and take over. And so I've seen it more, it seems like recently, where in the past it was just, it didn't really seem to matter on those standard fish. But the big fish, they still do big fish things, and I don't know, they bite at times and then they just disappear. So I've tried to figure out some of the stuff, like I've heard a few, like Corey Sprengel talk about moonrise and moonset and things like that, and I've paid attention a little bit to it, but I have never put any correlation to it on my bites, so I've never been able to make any connections. So that's my opinion on it. I think most of the time on Sakakawea, you just got to be there when they're there, and sometimes in a tournament, like so far this year in the tournaments, we've grounded out on the AIM series, we've grounded out in 2 spots. The 2 tournaments, we fished 2 spots, one each day. We just sat there the whole day and waited for them and just slowly picked off a big one when they'd come through. We've had a good success, but it wasn't like we caught tons of them, but we just sat and waited them out.
You also mentioned something that kind of struck me. You're talking about going back on these old Google Earth images. That's a big thing in a lot of these like the North Dakota, the pothole region, where you've got a lot of lakes that don't even have any mapping, and so it's such a cool thing, to be able to go back and go on the old dates on Google Earth and try to find these, little adjustments on a shoreline or find old rock piles or whatever information you can really get. And Devil's Lake, certainly, you've got map chips of all that old information. It's so valuable, but not a lot of people talk about it on the reservoirs like Sakakawea. So, for you, not to give up all your secrets, but, when you're looking back on that, are you just trying to study a spot that maybe you already know that there's fish, or are you looking for new spots, when you're going through that type of technology? And what are you looking for? Is it maybe just an odd spot on a big spot to try to find the best spot, or try to find the X, or are you trying to find new spots that way, or how are you utilizing that technology?
A little bit of both. A lot of it is, especially on the very west end of Sakakawea, when they first, and it's gotten a lot better now with the mapping technology, but when I first figured this out with Google Earth quite a few years ago, the west end of Sakakawea was hardly mapped at all, because when they came and especially Navionics came and mapped it, they did it when the water was low and in the early 2000s. Well, all the stuff up that we fish now was all out of the water. So that's, I'm looking at that, and I remember when we were fishing in that low water growing up, and I was like, we should maybe go and figure out some of this stuff. And this was kind of just as GPS was starting to become a little more popular and used in boats, and like maybe we should go and try and mark some of these places and and do this, and this is before all the map chips and stuff. But we didn't get a lot of time. I didn't spend, the days on the water that I do now, so we didn't do that. But that was part of it, just to get some of the points and the old creek channels and things like that might hold fish now, and get those marked and get your GPS coordinates on them. Some of your flooded vegetation, when the lake was really low, you flooded a lot of willows, cottonwoods, things like that. And especially you go out in areas and you start trolling now in 14 feet. In some areas in 14 feet, you're going to be snagged constantly because it's trees, and other areas in 14 feet you're not. So if there's areas where you've been, a specific area you've been fishing, and you're trying to figure out, you can kind of see where those tree lines are, and you can mark those tree lines and hopefully troll on the edge of those tree lines along the shorelines, because you can't see them. And then if you have those tree lines marked a little bit, the ice takes them out and stuff too now, which varies it a little bit. There's definitely structure I thought should be there from Google Earth that's not there now, and I go and look for it. So that's kind of the main thing. A lot of in some of those big points, and just like you said, finding that X, finding that specific spot, that little corner or something that might hold those fish. That's kind of what I looked for. But again, with all the mapping technology now that's there, you can get a pretty good map too, where it's not a secret anymore as it was in the past. And you think some of the guys way back in the day that had these spots that are now rolling over in their grave because everybody knows about it with the map chips. Probably a little frustrated with it.
Oh yeah, there's so all across the walleye country, all the old timers, Let's wrap it up right there, and why don't you let everybody know where they can find you? What are your social medias and your guide business and contact information?
Okay, so I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things. On Facebook, it's Liebel's Guide Service. Instagram and Twitter, the handle's just Liebel's Guide. And then also my website is liebelsguideservice.com. That's Liebels guideservice.com. And then best way to get a hold of me is by phone, 701-770-6746. And we do have some openings coming for the remainder of the summer, and I have multiple guides that work for me too, so we should be able to get you out most days moving forward. So, and even some into the fall.
Excellent, man. Anything else you want to add? Otherwise, I'm super happy, and I appreciate the time.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Sarah.
We'll talk to you. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another JMO podcast. Make sure to head over to our social media at Instagram or Facebook at Jason Mitchell Outdoors, where you can recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show. Also, if you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcast, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with all your friends.